What can really change is fighting for your freedoms, privacy, and voting with your dollars. Just say no to their system. The more you support the current banking system, what may happen is that you are actually encouraging Canada to evolve into a similar form of the systems in Argentina. That's why the Bank of Canada is doing some joint collaboration with MIT. It's a system which the government still controls. When matters become digital, well, I'll just probably want you to think about you become a collection of data to be observed, controlled, filtered, and censored. I'm sure when it comes to our Canadian economy, you've probably got a lot of concerns. And one of those concerns is around the rising prices of goods and services. Well, I've come across a video that I thought it was very well worth sharing, and it was done very well by Upton. He's captured the essence of the lifestyle and economics in Argentina and has gotten some really good perspectives from the citizens of Argentina and their challenges that they face with rising prices. Now, when it comes to at least my process of doing research, a lot of it has come from my past life of being an auditor and a research analyst. When it comes to gathering information, I can't always rely on widely published sources, so I go about finding the core of those sources where perspectives are a lot more authentic, they haven't been filtered, massaged, or manipulated. The key that I'm looking for is the authenticity. I'm looking for the raw experience before any editing has been done to that information. So I have a more better perspective of drawing my own conclusions. My conclusions may differ than what may be commonly held. What you're about to watch is a real good video from Upton, catching the perspectives of Argentinians living in a highly inflationary environment. And it really highlights the core and the essence of the economics that we're dealing with today here in Canada.
This is the central bank?
This is the central bank. This is the central bank.
Why does it look like this?
I don't know. They are working on putting it better, but the US dollar reserves are really low right now.
So what that gentleman said was the US dollar reserves were really low right now. And just pay attention to that because at least in this video, the US dollar reserves is used as the current stable currency for the citizens to transact and hold their store of value or their wealth.
Inflation started because the government just keeps printing money.
When you go to the supermarket, you cannot know how much you're going to spend.
We don't know what's going to happen like tomorrow.
So how do people live knowing the value of their currency is going down rapidly?
We live in the present and we do what we can to like survive, you know. The value of the pesos is so like bad.
Okay, so I want to just kind of bring into perspective of the economy, the Argentinian economy, and I'm just going to share some information for you to see what that economy looks like. So what you see in front of you is the life to date, at least based on what data is available in terms of the Argentinian economy. If we look at the Argentinian economy in the form of what's called M0 money supply. So M0, the money supply, is known as the most liquid measure of money supply, including coins and notes in circulation and other assets that are easily convertible to cash. And if we look at the life-to-date charts, so prior to 1992, we can see the levels of money that has been printed from then until especially from 2010 up until current. The amount of increase just in 1 month, so in February it was 367,2002 Argentinian pesos, and now it's compared to January, it's 363,1047. These numbers are so large, that's just showing you how much money is being printed for that. And if we look at what their peso value was worth back in 1992, so if we look at the amount of money that is circulating in the Argentinian economy, compared to back in 1992, this is a very drastic increase in terms of how much money has been deployed into the economy, therefore decreasing the value of the Argentinian pesos.
She's not exaggerating. It's lost 99% of its value over the years. Things have gotten so crazy here that there is now multiple exchange rates. You have the official rate, and then you have what's called the blue market exchange rate.
In terms of the official exchange rate, so this is the global exchange rate that is being reported by the government of Argentina. Now, this exchange rate is not representative, and what he's going to show is what's called the blue market exchange rate. And that blue market exchange rate is actually the value of what the citizens are living with in terms of that exchange rate. In a well-functioning economy, there should not be any blue market exchange rate. These exchange rates should very much be similar. But right now, what's actually reported and what's actually being experienced, there's a huge wide discrepancy. So that's what he's going to explain.
Let me explain. This chicken sandwich and lemonade cost me about 1,000 Argentinian pesos. If I were to put that on my credit card, that would cost me 23 US dollars.
So that 23 US dollars is what he's paying if he's using the globally reported exchange rate. What's also important to understand is if you have an understanding of the foreign exchange market, it's actually not a regulated industry as opposed to other financial market industries. Foreign currencies are not a regulated market. So the reporting, honestly, it's you can question, where is this reporting of this exchange rate coming from? Is it arbitrary? I'll just let you draw that conclusion.
But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pay in cash. And at the blue market exchange rate, which I got, which is about 210 for every US dollar, this lunch cost me less than $5.
Now what you can see is the actual experience. Because he's local in the economy, transacting using the US dollar as the exchange, if he were to convert that for the currency that you can get on the front lines in the local economy, that's what he's actually paying. So you can just see there's a very large discrepancy between what's reported and what actually the value between what's worth, what the currency is actually worth. There's a huge discrepancy in terms of the dollar value, like $23 and $4.73 to what it can actually buy in the local economy. And this is all attributed to the amount of money that's being printed in the economy.
The currency here loses its value so often that the government has taken away 13 zeros over the past 40 years.
So you can see in the past 40 years, at least the chart and the data that I shared with you, that is at least 30 years. And you can see the amount of money that was printed and circulating in the economy back in 1992 is significantly lower than the amount of money that is circulating in the Argentinian economy right now. And that amount of money that's being printed is still ever increasing.
And with such crazy inflation, a lot of these smaller banknotes don't mean much at all. So 100 Argentinian pesos is now equal to 50 cents. 20 would be 10 cents, and these coins hardly mean anything at all, which means spending money in Argentina can become a hassle. But 100 Argentinian pesos used to be worth $100 back in the 90s. So how did we get here? Nearly everyone here I talk to says that when they get paid, they immediately buy everything they need.
The money starts losing the power. So when I get my salary, I could buy 10 packs of milk. By the end of the week, I would be able to buy only 6.
Most people try to buy things from the grocery store as soon as possible because the prices are going to go up within that month. That's a way to make it up with inflation, so inflation doesn't get you.
So what you can really draw from this experience is as the government keeps printing more money, the value of the current currency is going down, and the amount of goods and products that can be purchased from it is actually also you're not able to get as much purchase from it. And the rate at which the value is eroding for the Argentinian peso is so rapid that once they get paid from their salary, they can buy 10. But if they wait just 1 week, the amount of erosion to the value has gone down in terms of 6. And that is if the pesos were used in the trading of milk. So 10 packs of milk was only used to purchase 6 packs of milk now.
And if they have any money left over,
the rest of it, people will go and buy US dollars, or nowadays cryptocurrency is very popular in Buenos Aires.
What is important to understand is because the goods and services that they need to sustain themselves in the local economy, they're still getting paid in Argentinian pesos. And when they get paid in Argentinian pesos, they're going to spend that money immediately so that they get the sustenance that they need. So for example, using groceries, and if whatever is left, instead of retaining the value in Argentinian pesos, they're going to convert the exchange of that money into US dollars, where that US dollar, in their perspective, is much more stable.
So apparently what happens here is that when the currency you're getting paid in is inflating 60% a year.
I want to make sure that the language here is really important. Most of the time, people refer inflation to the increases of prices, but what's important to just distinguish, this is very subtle, that the more money that's being printed, the less the value that money is worth, which is driving up, because of the supply of money that is circulating the economy, which is chasing after fewer goods, that puts upward pressure on those goods and the production of those goods and services. So if there's not a lot of supply in those production of goods and services, there's a lot of pressure because more dollars are now chasing after those supplies. Let's say if a lot of people if a lot of citizens need milk, but there's only so much milk that's available, but everybody has money, the people with the most money are going to end up with that milk. So they're going to pay more for that milk. That's why there's a lot of upward pressure on the prices of goods and services. So that's in the increase in prices. That's not what inflation is. Inflation is because of the excess printing of money that is driving up the pressure of the prices.
Here, what's the first thing you do? You take that money and you convert it to a more stable currency, like the US dollar. Having US dollar is hugely popular in Argentina as a form of savings. They don't spend it, they just save it. And they literally take $100 bills, put it under their mattress, and save it.
So Argentina's government says the US dollar is equal to one thing, but the market says it's equal to a lot more. But in an effort to keep its power and ensure its people will continue using its own currency, the government here says that private citizens can only buy $200 in foreign currency on the official exchange market every month.
This is important to understand. So now, first, the government is the one creating the problem by printing the excess of money and having too much of that money circulating into the economy. So when the government can print money without any real controls or limitations that have fixed its value, so there's no cap to how they print that money, versus in the past, prior to 1971, before money was indexed as against the value of gold. So as for every dollar that's printed, the equal value of gold had to be held in storage by the Federal Reserve. This was prior to 1971, before President Nixon removed the gold standard for that money. This is where the supply of money can outperform the production of goods and services. And when the governments and central banks can print money at the push of a button without producing any productive economic value, and in return, to pay that debt back, the way that governments have people pay that debt back for the extra money that's being printed, they collect it through taxes, which is a percent of the income you work for. One connection I want to help you establish is clearly you can see that when the government, the central banks, and other parties that are involved on the fiat money system at a push of a button can increase and print more money and distribute and circulate it into the economy. In order to pay that debt back, they have to charge citizens taxes. And so taxes is a revenue generating activity for the government. And for them to catch up to that debt, they have to either charge more taxes or have more citizens work and increase that income so that they can collect more taxes. If there's no control to how they print money and the ease of that money coming into the economy is increasing, the way to pay that debt back is through the production of the citizens by taxing them. This is never going to catch up to the level that the government has printed with the citizens' efforts to pay that debt back. That is a very, very difficult way of getting there. And that is a significant imbalance of time, value, and effort. Now, if you watched my video on personal income taxes, what I want you to understand is that the government is the one who created the taxation system, and the rules are generally designed in their favor. And they've favored it in such a way where if you don't pay taxes, they have put in measures in place to make it illegal. And this is the example where if they don't like what you're doing, if they want to specifically control a behavior that they want from you, which in the Argentinians example is they do not want them to load up and restrict the access to US dollars, they're going to make you pay a steep tax for that. How the Income Tax Act is designed, it's a progressive tax system, meaning the more income you make, the more taxes you pay. But those tax brackets that the Income Tax Act has been written on, they don't get adjusted for the very same inflationary reasons or at the same pace that inflation is moving. So in order for you to keep up with those prices that are being driven up because of all that printing of money, you have to earn more income. And when you earn more income, the government is going to tax you more heavier. And what I've showed in the video of my income taxes, that at certain points, the amount of income you earn becomes extremely penalizing from you from a tax perspective. It's like a never-ending cycle. The cost of goods and services that you need to pay for and live is increasing, so you need to increase more income. And for you to increase more income, the government's going to tax you more heavily for it, and therefore you have less disposable income to purchase those goods and services, and that cycle never ends. It just keeps going over and over and over and over. I don't use this term very lightly, but I want to share a screen in terms of a definition for you to look at. So the definition I want to share with you is, because of just how the system is designed, in essence, whether directly or indirectly, this is probably a modern form of slavery. And how is slavery defined? The condition in which one person is owned as property by another and is under the owner's control, especially in involuntary servitude. The practice of owning slaves, and it's a mode of production in which slaves constitute the principal workforce. Could this system that we are currently living in, or at least what the Argentinians are living in, are they in maybe the modern form of slavery?
That's probably why you see a lot of people selling dollars on the streets. And the government here even does raids to crack down on government exchanges happening.
So what's important to now understand is, if the government doesn't want a particular action, they've made it illegal for the citizens to find their own ways because they want a particular behavior set from them. So they've defined the exchange of currency at a level to be illegal. This isn't a philosophical discussion of what's legal or illegal. I want you to draw your own conclusions here.
Inflation is so high because the government keeps printing money.
But if that's the problem, why doesn't the government just print less money?
Well, it's not that easy. See, if you live here, you get free healthcare, free university, even insanely low electricity prices, like $3 for your bill each month.
I'm not trying to say anything in terms of those social services that are provided here in Canada. I am very grateful for those services. But one of the things that's really important to understand is, very similarly here, they have access to education, healthcare, and those government services. And one of the challenges that most of you what you may feel is that the amount of taxes that you're paying is used to fund those services. That's the definition, at least why they're collecting taxes. However, what's also important to understand is we are entrusting the government as the custodians to, after they've collected the tax money, to redeploy that to those social services, whether or not the money spent in those social services are being looked at properly.
That's because the government is subsidizing or even paying for a lot of these things, and no politician wants to be the one to cut some of these things off.
In the perfect world, it's a very beautiful idea that everything is for free. Of course, health and education first. It's wonderful.
That's why you need 60% inflation to finance all these subsidies and all this welfare.
Part of the Argentinian culture just got used to inflation. It's very sad to say that, but Argentinians got used to live like this.
As you can see, this is not something that happened immediately. This was something that happened over time. And in Argentinians' case, it's been 40 years since the amount of money printing has accumulated to what it is at. And now the rate of that inflation is much more drastic. Again, it's because it's being driven by governments spending and all of that money that is circulating the economy. And there's no, the citizens here don't have as much, or don't have any recourse on the government spending of that money. So they're printing money to fulfill those services, and those services, whether or not there's proper scrutiny going on in terms of how that money is being spent, is largely questionable.
Argentina spend more money all the time, and we don't produce more.
But some people I speak with say the reason for inflation isn't just about these government services, it's also because of corruption.
Inflation also comes because they would say they spend the pavement of a highway road, and they just keep it in their pocket.
Another very important point here is that the money that is being collected to use for public services like infrastructure or anything like that, in the case of Argentina, not a lot of that money actually gets deployed to those projects. Rather, it's actually being circumvented in a certain way. Now, corruption is a very delicately used term. It is from her perspective. I'm not an Argentinian living in that economy, so I can't speak to that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case that's currently going on. At least from my experience as an auditor in the past, I'm kind of tongue-in-cheek saying that these arrangements are not a surprise for me to see. It leaves me to question whether the Canadian government has very similar arrangements. I mean, there's been a lot of concerns with how money is being spent currently, especially with the subsidies that has been happening recently because of the emergencies, and how some of our political leaders have also been caught under the microscope.
All of this is causing insane instability of its currency and people's salaries. The IMF, or International Monetary Fund, has bailed out Argentina 22 times. The country hasn't been able to pay back its debt and owes billions of dollars. In fact, Argentina owes more than any other country to the IMF.
If the IMF is funding a very crippled economy, installing more debt and restructuring the debt on a developing country, a country in a very vulnerable state, they've put some significant burdens and shackles on the economy. And question is, how is that money actually ever going to be paid?
When the IMF gives us money, they're like putting a debt on the shoulders of generations to come. And that's robbing. They shouldn't do that. That girl will owe some other people a lot of money, and she didn't ask for that.
So this is the example that if you watched my video on personal income taxes, I myself has been born into this system where I am required to pay income taxes for my effort to pay for the public services. I have inherited that. In that same example, that girl that she was referencing to, this is the challenges that Argentina has been faced with. That young girl is now going to grow up carrying the burden of being saddled with these shackles of debt that has not been created by her, but from, at least in this video, from the government's printing of money.
It absolutely amazes me that despite such a crazy economic situation, such crazy consecutive inflation, that Buenos Aires feels very, very rich. I mean, you see HSBC Bank, you see some of the biggest banks in the world that have huge towers here. Everything is clean, safe. I mean, this is really one of the most cleanest and what appears from the outside to be wealthiest cities I've seen in the Americas.
In many places I visit, there are insanely beautiful parks, beautiful architecture, and an overall feeling that life is good.
That's the viewpoint. I think most citizens will agree that at least the environment that they're living with, they're happy about it. And despite the economics of what's going on, at least they have very good facilities from the spending that's been going on, the upkeep of that. That's just a perspective to take in to consider.
Argentina is now seeing more advertisements and more adoption of cryptocurrencies.
If you talk with someone younger, they are more into Bitcoin.
I learned about Bitcoin a long time ago from my son.
They are trying to do something to play with Bitcoins or cryptocurrency in some ways. But if you talk with someone in their 30s or 40s, they are thinking just about dollars.
This is where there's some conversation talking about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. There's some perspectives around that, and I'm not going to talk about that too much in this particular video. But what's actually important to understand is that there's a reason why these citizens are moving towards Bitcoin or those cryptocurrencies, because it's decentralized and it's not in the control of the governments and the central bank.
He was playing games, I don't know what, and he showed me the white paper. And I was like, oh my God, this is freedom.
The more restrictions and capital controls you have, the more Bitcoin you need.
And I think that we will be able to keep that wealth that we produce here in Argentina. That would be very, very important. And not let the government waste it.
I think the very important thing to take away is the government is, at least this conclusion that citizens are coming with, is that the money is being wasted by the government. And so they keep printing more money, and that's impacting the citizens and how they transact in real life. So what happened is these citizens have moved towards Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Now, I can't speak too much about either of these. I may disagree on some of the cryptocurrencies depending on their project and how the anatomy of those cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin's a little bit of a different animal here. I mean, some people call Bitcoin people's money because it's not being controlled by one central government or central party. So the citizens in Argentina have flocked to an alternative mechanism for medium of exchange and transacting with each other. And there's a reason for that.
Government doesn't have a clue how Bitcoin works in another world.
So what is the solution here?
Don't spend more than you make. It's the same personal, a company, or a country. You don't need to be a great economist to know that. It's more simple than the people say.
I always say this should end, but then you look at Venezuela, and Venezuela maybe 20 years of a lot more inflation. You never know how this will stop or how or when.
We're going to have inflation for a long time.
These citizens make a real good point. If you look, they're definitely very attuned to research and seeing other perspectives. And they can see from Venezuela, which was in a very similar circumstance, actually much more ahead from Argentina. Now Argentina is facing the same road as Venezuela. And they can see that Venezuela has not exited that corruption and the printing of money from the government, while Argentina is on that very same path. So what does that mean for us in Canada? Well, this is where that question of, if you want a little bit of certainty, the best way to look at is at other countries that have already experienced what is happening now.
Could it get worse?
Yes, of course, always.
It would get worse because the government, they don't learn the lesson, what's right to do. They just keep doing the same thing. So if we're going to do the same things and have the same problems, what would you expect to a solution to that,
So what that citizen said was very eye-opening, because the governments are not going to learn their lesson. Would you have any confidence in our current government, whether or not it's this party or a change in parties, whether or not that is going to happen? Well, ultimately, that's for you to decide to make your conclusion. They're going to make and do the same things when it comes to solving the problem. Now, would you entrust them to fixing or having us get us out of the problems? If they're the ones who created the problem, how much confidence do you have in terms of them getting us out of the problem? This is the part that I wanted you to understand. I'd have to applaud the citizens in Argentina for staying positive. At least that's what was captured in that video. And I'm sure they've had to endure many challenges mentally and emotionally that I've never actually got to see. Now, what they're going through though, doesn't that sound a little bit familiar? Let me share something with you for you to take a look at. Could Argentina have been one of the case studies used in terms of where the World Economic Forum came with the slogan, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy"? Well, the happy, that expression is very, very vague. I think whether or not you want to be happy or whether or not they want you to be happy. Now, if this is the first time you've heard of the World Economic Forum, you may want to know who the chairman is. And that chairman is Klaus Schwab. And he actually has written a book about the recent economic events. If you get the chance, you probably want to read this book. And I want to warn you, this book, if you actually go through reading it, it will shock you. And it wouldn't be a surprise to you on the many events that are currently happening now in our Canadian economy. It's actually all described in that book. In this book, actually describes a lot of the economic details around root causes of crises, a need for a great reset, and to disrupt current global social, economic, and political systems, and also talking about shaking up to show the deficiencies which were manifested in our global system even before COVID broke out. And in that book, he also talks about the ideologies, what roles each parts of the population, classes, and societies play, and what role the government plays. If you want to see what the future is going to look like, look no further to Venezuela and Argentina. And this is one of the great examples of what the ideologies were described in that book and what it would look like. The economic role that the central bank and the government has in the events in Argentina is the same economic role that is just being rolled out to the rest of the NATO member countries, which include Canada, the United States, Great Britain, and the European Union. Now, I'm not saying all politicians are corrupt and evil. There are some that are not. However, when the system of parliament is set by quantity of votes and the number of people, including the critical members, are part of the World Economic Forum, does this not present a problem to our sovereignty and independence? Let's take a look at some of their representatives. I'm sure you are aware of who Justin Trudeau is, and Justin Trudeau is a member of the World Economic Forum, and he's the Prime Minister. Let's take a look at some of his messaging since the pandemic back in 2020. And this is a video from just on YouTube, as you can see. And you can see here back on September 29th, 2020, this was the opportunity for a reset. Let's take a look at some of the excerpts from his video.
The last 6 months have laid bare fundamental gaps and inequities within our societies and between them. As with climate change, those who have the least are impacted the most. That's why last spring, Canada worked with Prime Minister Andrew Holness and Secretary General Antonio Guterres to convene a high-level meeting to discuss how leaders around the world could work together to close these gaps and build a better, more equitable system that works for everyone. In May, we agreed to look at 6 urgent areas of action to mobilize financing for the response and the recovery. Over the course of the summer, our 6 working groups produced over 250 policy options. On September 8th, finance ministers gathered to discuss these options and the recommendations for the short, medium, and long term. The most promising ideas will be taken up within existing IMF and World Bank processes, as well as at the G7 and G20 leaders summits later in the fall.
250 policy options with finance ministers from the G20s presenting ideas to the IMF and the World Bank processes. Isn't the Argentinian government being funded by the IMF?
Then, in December, we're going to have the opportunity to meet again to discuss the progress we've made. Because we understand that right now we have to fix urgent problems, but in the long run, we also have to fix the system so that it works for everyone.
So they're talking about now wanting to fix the system. There's definitely imperfections in the systems, but these redesigns of these systems, how much have you been able to participate in the redesign of these systems?
To eliminate this virus anywhere, we need to eliminate it everywhere. This is an important initiative, and I encourage other governments to join in as well.
Now, not only is this happening in Canada, this is happening globally across the G7s and the G20s. Meaning this is a globally coordinated effort, and it's no longer isolated to those countries like Venezuela, Argentina.
We need to work together, and not just on vaccines. Canada believes that a strong, coordinated response across the world and across sectors is essential. This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
So the reset sounds very familiar to the book, The Great Reset from COVID-19. And if you read the book, you will see the same things that are actually being said in the book. But this time it was written by Klaus Schwab.
This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Now, one may question whether or not those redesign of the systems are actually going to address the poverty and other instabilities that is being mentioned.
Our government is committed to investing even more in the years to come. In addition, we will continue to advocate for extending the debt service suspension initiative.
So this part is important. So the government is investing even more money to the years to come and extending the debt service suspension initiative, meaning there are more money more money being printed just like that in, does that sound familiar, like Argentina? So if you look at Canada's money printing, the M0 back in prior to 1963, levels were very low until they started to gradually increase. And now that money supply, the government has printed just in the years of that pandemic has, so if I just to narrow down the focus, in the last 5 years, so since that let's just call it that announcement. So what was initially 100 trillion is now 500 trillion. And now the levels have come back down to 377 trillion. Now, there's a lot of subject to debate to why that has come down, but it's definitely not because of a contraction of the money supply. That money has been going other places, but that's another topic for the conversation. But as you can see from looking at the environment that Argentina and Venezuela found themselves, it's all because of the same levels of money being printed by the government.
Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs.
So what is building back better, sustainable development, and those SDGs? Looks familiar. The World Economic Forum 2030 vision, digital technology for global goals. The world is not on track to meet the sustainable development goals, the SDGs, but digital technology can help. And here are their partners: Amazon, there's a whole list down here, Cisco, Columbia University, Dell Technology, Google.org. And if we look at the United Nations, this is the details of those sustainable development goals, 2030 agenda. This is all laid out in this circumstance where the NATO countries are moving towards. And if you're wondering what, as they are moving towards this direction, what does the economy that you are living in, the Canadian economy, what that outlook looks like? What it can look like is very similar to what's happening in Argentina. What does the sustainable development system and the digital technology for those global goals look like? Well, if they are printing that much more money, and if you remember, Argentina is focused on moving their money into a stable currency like the US dollar. I mean, well, if the US dollar Federal Reserve is doing the exact same thing of printing money, they're going to find themselves in a very similar situation. In a sense, this is how they the Argentinian government forced the citizens to move towards a stable currency. Well, this could be, well, if they are devaluing the current fiat money, where are the citizens going to move their money? Well, this could be a possible indication. Back on March 16th, 2022, the Bank of Canada and MIT announced a joint central bank digital currency collaboration. So now they're moving, when Justin Trudeau talks about updating the system, meaning probably they're pushing the current system to its extreme limits so that by them printing more money, they recognize the value of the money is getting weaker. Well, that's a possible perfect segue to introduce a new system, which is the digital central bank digital currency. And if we go back to those goals and objectives, those are tying to how digital technology can help. Well, let's take a look at his other members, significant members in Parliament. We've got Chrystia Freeland, who is the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance of Canada. And I've highlighted a couple very important sections from the World Economic Forum. Ms. Freeland was appointed Deputy Canada and Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. In this capacity, she has led United Response to COVID-19 pandemic. She was appointed the Minister of Finance in August 2020. She then served as deputy, and they've also described some more of her experience being the deputy editor, Toronto-based Global Mail. She's been part of Canadian-owned Thomson Reuters. There's a reason why I've highlighted those, because the information that's distributed from those sources could be inauthentic. At the same time, there's some very important books that, if you want to understand the ideologies, include The Plutocrats, The Rise of the New Super Global Rich, the New Global Super Rich, and The Fall of Everyone Else. And I think there should be some concerns here. She's a member of the forum's board of trustees, and while serving as a Canadian member of Parliament. To me, that flags conflict of interest. And I'm sure you've heard in the news most recently where the NDP has formed a coalition with the Liberal government. Well, let's take a look at who the leader of the NDP is. Guess who it is? It's Jagmeet Singh. He's the leader of NDP, and he's also on the World Economic Forum. And this is based on March 26th, the new NDP Liberal coalition government. So ultimately, these individuals have started to enter the Canadian system and have potentially adjusted it to favor the agendas. And probably you might need to wonder, are the policies that are being implemented being in favor of someone else or the Canadian citizens? This is a very important question for you to consider and ask. Let's tie into what Canada's Banking Association feels about the digital revolution and how this can be of a good purpose. Let's take a look at some of these. The Canadian Bankers Association has considered digital IDs, where the World Economic Forum agrees banks should lead the digital ID system. So not only is there development toward a central bank digital system, the Canadian Banking Association is also part of that, and they have jumped into including digital IDs to connect the systems together. So they're bringing greater integration. What does that mean in terms of that greater integration? Who serves that power? So with the integration of a digital ID system with the digital currency system, what other forms of control can happen? Well, could those digital IDs or health passports be something where they can control what you have access to or not? I'll let you decide. Where do you think this is going to head? What you've seen is just examples of how individuals in particular places of power have now entered into the Canadian system, and they carry significant positions in Parliament and now also dominate the voting numbers that can make changes to how they want to use it. What can really change is fighting for your freedoms, privacy, and voting with your dollars. Just say no to their system. The more you support the current banking system, what may happen is that you are actually encouraging Canada to evolve into a similar form of the systems in Argentina. And if you really want to learn more about creating your own banking system, make sure you visit watchibc.com for a free 90-minute training to learn more. Could the patterns you see happening in Argentina be happening in Canada? Well, the Argentinian government prints more money, devalues their money, so the citizens find solitude in the US dollar as a stable reserve currency. Well, that's funny, isn't it? I mean, the US dollar and Canadian dollars right now are doing the exact same thing with the Federal Reserve and the central bank and government. So the ultimate question is, what is going to be the future stable reserve currency? Is it possible those 250 policy options concocted by the inner circle of the G20 ministers of finance are doing the exact same thing as Argentina, devaluing fiat currencies to indirectly push all citizens to a new reserve currency? Is that new reserve currency going to be digital, not only a CBDC local to the Canadian government, but a global one? Could other mediums of exchange be outlawed and taxed like that in Argentina and the US dollar? I guess that's why the Bank of Canada is doing some joint collaboration with MIT. It's a system which the government still controls. And since the World Economic Forum also agrees banks should be the ones leading digital IDs, when matters become digital, well, I'll just probably want you to think about, you become a collection of data to be observed, controlled, filtered, and censored. What could that mean for your privacy and livelihood if you don't meet those algorithms that are set by AI? Hey, I mean, ultimately, this is just a conspiracy, right? If that's what you thought, please dislike the video. It's okay, I can take it. I'm sorry for wasting your time. Otherwise, like this video, and if you agree, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you soon.